introducing Rabbi Zeff at 10:05 on a Wednesday morning. The Efrat English Kollel as we zoom along. I believe this is part 5 of messianism and the Mashiach and topics thereof.
Okay. Nice to see everybody again. We're in the middle of a discussion. I hope we're sort of on the tail end. This is sort of the 5th session devoted to this huge topic. And the specific issue we're dealing with is the possibility of a dead Messiah. Now, the Rambam already dealt with the issue of Jesus's possibility of being a Messiah, and we don't have to review that. But we started to talk about last week the more contemporary issue, lahavdil elef havdalot, to make a complete separation between the previous messianic claim, which I mentioned, and the messianic claim surrounding the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the most recent head of Chabad. And we're taking a look at a collection of sources which perhaps could be cited to support the notion that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the Messiah. I mean, those are two different possibilities there. And the response of Rabbi Menashe Klein, who was a very prominent Hasidic posek, who responds to these different suggestions of sources that could be mustered to support the idea that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was Mashiach. Okay. Now, the first source, this is just a little bit more review, and then we'll go on. The first source we saw last time was a famous passage from the Talmud Masechet Sanhedrin, in which different rabbis said that what's the Mashiach's name, and each one of them cited their rabbi, right? So the students of Yanai said his name is Yino, and the students of Hanina said his name was Hanina. Students of Menachem said his name is Menachem, etc. Okay, so the most important part of that source was actually the continuation, which said the following quite explicitly: if we want to know who the Mashiach is from those who are among the dead, so then it's Daniel. If we want to know who the Mashiach is among the living, it's a contemporary of ours, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the editor of the Mishnah, 2nd century. Now, the problem is that the Talmud uses a Hebrew word, is all a review, kagon, like. If you want to know who the Mashiach is among the dead, it's kagon. It's like Daniel. If you want to know who the Mashiach is among the living, it's like Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Based upon that word like, Rashi, the most famous commentator in the Talmud, offered two possible explanations of that passage in the Talmud. One is, maybe the passage is trying to tell us what the personality of Mashiach would be like, a prototype. Could we find a precedent for the prototypical messianic personality among the dead? Well, Daniel fits the bill. He was a great pious person, and he suffered. Those two qualities Rashi isolates out. If we want to find a prototype among the living, it would be someone like Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. According to that reading, it's not suggesting that Daniel was the Mashiach or anybody else who was dead was the Mashiach. It's just saying if we're looking for a prototype of the messianic personality, we can find one among someone who's no longer alive. We could find one among those who are alive right now. But then Rashi says, maybe the word kagon is not really functioning the way it usually functions, in the meaning of like, but in the sense of it is. So if you interpret it that way, the Talmud would be saying, if you're looking for the Mashiach among the dead, it's Daniel. If you're looking for Mashiach among the living, it's Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Now, based upon...
What motivates Rashi to bring the second opinion here, which is so unusual? Why not just stay with the first?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not really sure. That's my homework.
Well, Rashi generally brings two opinions when he has a problem with the first one that it could be argued against.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right methodologically. Bruce is pointing out that the reading which says that we're looking for a prototype So a prototype messianic personality like among the dead, Daniel, or among the living, Rabbi Yosef, that works fine. What's wrong with that? And it fits the word kagon. So what pushes Rashi to sort of ignore the literal meaning of the word kagon and come up with a very controversial idea that it could be that Daniel is the Mashiach or was the Mashiach, and Rabbi Yosef is the Mashiach or was the Mashiach, right? So good question, Bruce, and I'm going to owe you and the other thousands of listeners.
We have another shir which says that Rashi spoke to his contemporary people to give them hope in difficult times. Maybe there's something in there that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why that really answers the question, because even if you interpret the word that would mean that, you know, don't get upset, because I mean, that really leads us to the next point, which is what that would mean according to Menashe Klein, which is that every generation has someone who could fit the bill, and you know, maybe, and even Rashi generation presumably somebody who fits the bill. He has the prototypical messianic personality. But in any case, so I owe you an answer to that. That's a really good question. I'm surprised I didn't think of it myself. So thank you. So the second source we saw, which will be important for Rabbi Menashe's kind of response, is that there's a passage which says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was told by Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu the prophet, to go to Rome. The Mashiach is over there in Rome. So he goes to Rome and he asks Mashiach, whoever that was, you know, when are you coming? And the Mashiach said, today. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi reported back to Eliyahu that the guy's a liar. He said he was coming today and he didn't lie, and he didn't come today. So Eliyahu said, yeah, he would have come today if you would have done what Hashem wants you to do. If you behave properly, he would have come today. Okay, so Rabbi Menashe Klein, who's this Hasidic authority who died in 2011, he responded to those sources. He said the following. He said something that's pretty compelling logically. He says the following. In every generation, there is a Messiah. What does that mean? There's somebody who Hashem has designated or has earned the right to be the one who is going to be the Mashiach. But it depends upon us. It depends upon if we deserve the actualization of that messianic potential. So even according to the reading of Rashi, this is what Rabbi Menashe Klein wants to claim, even according to the reading of Rashi, that the Talmud means if you're looking for Mashiach among the dead, it was Daniel. Among the living, it's Rabbi Yosef. All that means is that this person really is the Mashiach in the sense that if we deserve him. If we deserved him back in the time of Daniel, then it was Daniel. If we deserve him now, meaning in the time of the Mishnah, it was Rabbi Yosef. Likewise, the story in the Talmud of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi meeting the Messiah at the gates of Rome, it's the exact same thing. That this Messiah, he was the Messiah, whoever he was, but that generation didn't deserve him. So that's Rabbi Menashe Klein's explanation. However, and this is where we're now moving on, not so fast Kowalski. I want to show you a comment of the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel is a very fascinating personality who lived during the time of the Spanish expulsion. Before the expulsion, he was actually a high-ranking official in the court. And along with his many diplomatic responsibilities, he was able to become a great Torah scholar, and he wrote an extensive commentary on the Torah. He also wrote several works on messianism. You can imagine historically, by the way, that someone who experienced the tragic dislocation of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, this was a cataclysmic event in the 15th century, where you had perhaps the greatest center of Jewish vitality coming to an end. In a sense, it's like the Holocaust. Eastern Europe was the greatest center of Jewish vitality before the Holocaust. And within a few years, thanks to Hitler, Yamach Shemo, that it's deleted, wiped out. Iberian Peninsula was also deleted, wiped out, not through genocide, but through dispersion. And you can imagine the yearnings for redemption during that historical period. The Abarbanel writes the following. So let's take a look now at source number 5. Ukafize b'shuv Hashem et shivat Zion. And according to this, I'm just taking out that one sentence. So there's a discussion before it and a discussion afterwards. But just the salient passage. When Hashem returns the captivity of Zion, when redemption takes place, the messianic era, ingathering of the exiles, establishment of Jewish sovereignty, az melech HaMashiach, there will be a king Messiah. Someone's got to lead this great event. You need a leader. Vayimloch alamo, and he will reign over his nation. Va'al yikshe alecha, it shouldn't be problematic to you. Shia melech HaMashiach mina kamim b'tchiyah, that the Mashiach, the King Mashiach, King Messiah, will be from those who arise in the resurrection. Okay, let's take a step back. This is something we haven't really discussed, but perhaps we'll discuss it moving forward. Right now, just suffice it to mention that with this fundamental idea, which even the Rambam, though he was accused of not believing in it, he very much believed in resurrection of the dead, and he even lists it as his 13th of the 13 principles of faith. He discusses it explicitly in several of his writings. And like I said, perhaps as we go forward, we'll discuss this idea of resurrection of the dead. So he says that it shouldn't be problematic to you that theoretically there could be, in the period of redemption, the Mashiach who will be among those who will benefit from the resurrection of the dead. There'll be resurrection of the dead. Among those beneficiaries of this amazing event, resurrection of the dead, will be the Mashiach. Ki kfar nistapku al ze beperek Kollel. Our sages already entertained this possibility in the Talmud. V'amar Rav Asi im michayahu kagon Rabbeinu Kadosh im metayahu kagon Daniel ish chamudot. And he quotes that passage in the Talmud, that if the Messiah is from the dead, it's Daniel. And it's from the living, it's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. So according to the Abarbanel, you can definitely read this passage in the Talmud as meaning, like, by the way, Rashi's interpretation of his two, that it doesn't mean like the paradigmatic personality, Kagon, but it means really that the Mashiach could be from the dead, and it was Daniel. And it's not that it was, it is Daniel. How could it be Daniel? He's dead. Because as part of the redemptive process, there will be a resurrection of the dead. And Daniel will be resurrected, and he will be the Mashiach. He was the Mashiach, and he is the Mashiach. It's just that it spans two different stages, right? For whatever reason, we can use this notion that the world wasn't deserving back then, but he is the Mashiach. And when we are deserving, so there will be a resurrection of the dead, he'll be resurrected, and he will then finish off the task of being Mashiach. Now, the Abarbanel is no slouch. You can't just take the Abarbanel and throw him in the garbage can. So according to the Abarbanel's reading of the Talmud, there is a legitimate reading of the Talmud that the Mashiach could be somebody who was dead, is resurrected as part of the redemptive process, and then fulfills his role as Melech HaMashiach, King Messiah. Okay, any questions or comments on this?
Yes, I sense that there's a question here of the second coming, if I could use the Christian term, of a Messiah. If that is the case, then we are dealing with a very, very unusual interpretation of the idea of Mashiach coming from the dead. Secondly, I think there's a difference between the time of Mashiach and the time of the resurrection of the dead. I don't think it's the same time. So I have another question in that respect. I have difficulty with the Abarbanel's interpretation of Daniel coming back from the dead. It's a Christian concept. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Yaakov. So even if you wouldn't have asked that question, I would have addressed it. Okay, because that's an extremely important question. So the following. you really asked two questions. One of your questions was the order of resurrection of the dead and the messianic period. Now, that question doesn't trouble me very much because you're making an assumption about when the resurrection of the dead is going to happen relative to the messianic period. The truth of the matter is, and we'll discuss this perhaps on the 5th, 6th, or 7th session dealing with messianism, we don't know precisely the order of events. So it's theoretically possible that there'll be some steps in the redemptive process. That's why I use the word process, that take place even without Melech HaMashiach, and that there actually could be this miraculous event of resurrection of the dead before Mashiach reveals himself, and that the Melech HaMashiach will be, like I said before, a beneficiary of these initial preliminary stages of the messianic process that takes place even in the absence of the Mashiach, right? Because the Mashiach will be actually one who emerges from resurrection of the dead, not someone who engineers the resurrection of the dead. After all, resurrection of the dead is a miracle. Right? It's not God's going to make that happen, not King Mashiach, right? King Mashiach, according to us, which then leads us to the second and more profound question you're asking. I mentioned last time that Professor David Berger, who wrote this very extensive analysis of this issue and felt that the messianism in some quarters of Chabad undermines our rejection of Christianity. I mean, it seems to be suggesting there could be a second coming, right? That's your question. So the truth of the matter is, I think there's a simple answer. And that is the following. I'm going to borrow an idea from the Rambam. Now, you got to be careful. I'm not using the full theory of the Rambam's understanding of the messianic process, right? Because according to the Rambam, as we pointed out before, once a messianic candidate, someone who's has Chezkat Mashiach, right? He was potentially the Mashiach. He was under presumption Mashiach. Once he dies without accomplishing the messianic agenda, that's it. He's not the Mashiach. But I want to take another aspect of the Rambam's messianic theory and use it to answer that question about the second coming. According to the Abarbanel doesn't really have, obviously, a problem with the notion of a second coming, right? That was explicit. Yeah, but what about the Christian claim of second coming? Now we're going to borrow an idea from the Rambam. The Rambam pointed out in the censored part that we saw that there's a vast difference between a potential Messiah, someone who's Bechezkat Mashiach, under presumption of being the Messiah, who then doesn't fulfill the final stages or the rest of the messianic to-do list before he dies, and therefore is not the Messiah. There's a very big difference between that and Jesus. You remember that the Rambam pointed out that Jesus didn't accomplish anything of the messianic to-do list. On the contrary, Jesus was, to use the term that I creatively misappropriated from Christianity, Jesus was the Antichrist. Jesus accomplished through Christianity the inverse of the messianic to-do list, the exact opposite. You cannot possibly have, the reason that Daniel is the Messiah is because he had qualities of the Messiah. Now, his generation wasn't worthy, so it wasn't fully actualized. But it'll be fully actualized, according to this theory of the Barbanel, in the Messianic era. Whereas Jesus is a non-starter. Jesus cannot possibly be the personality that is going to benefit from the second coming, because the first incarnation of Jesus was Antichrist, was standing for something which is antithetical to Torah and the vision of what Messiah is supposed to accomplish. That person's a non-starter. So our problem is not with the notion of a second coming, according to Barbanel. Our problem is that whoever that personality is that's going to come back again has to be somebody that has the fundamental qualifications of Messiah, not somebody who created a process which in fact produced the exact antithesis of Messiah. Okay?
I understand what you're trying to present. My question remains, the concept of the second coming itself has problems. If you're going to be applying that idea, then there'll be a lot of, I call it identified individuals, or we can go through Tanach and identify potential Mashiachs who could basically be the Mashiach if that's the case.
What's wrong with that? You know,
Nothing.
I had a teacher, my teacher
encourages
Yaakov,
the Christian point of view.
So who says it's Christian? See, this is Yaakov, I love you. So this is, don't think this is a personal insult. But
no,
it's, yeah,
I'm
there's
just trying to understand the concept.
Yeah, and I know.
In the Jewish world, I never heard of that idea. Obviously, it's novel, and to me, it's alarming because it feeds into the Christian perspective of Messiah.
Okay, so now, sometimes I had this teacher in yeshiva that used to say sometimes, take away your question mark and just put a period. There is sometimes just say what you said, but make it a statement instead of a question. And that is that what you see from the Abarbanel is that already in the Talmud, this is how the Abarbanel understands Talmud. It's not like he's making it up. If the Talmud says that if you want to identify the Mashiach, if the Mashiach was somebody who's among the dead, it is Daniel. That's a decent reading of the Talmud. But what does that mean? That he's dead. So how is the Messiah? Answer, because when we're ready, he will come back in the resurrection of the dead. That is a logical and compelling way to understand that passage in the Talmud. And that's how Abarbanel understood it. Now, the fact that Christianity may have such a notion, it doesn't invalidate the notion.
Well, the first Christians were Jews, so maybe they viewed it as a Jewish idea.
Okay, so yeah, let's just go one step further. The notion of resurrection of the dead is not something invented by the Abarbanel, right? The notion of resurrection of the dead is firmly rooted in rabbinic literature and probably firmly rooted in Tanach. According to the Rambam, the prophet Daniel, in an unambiguous way, and we'll discuss this more later, attests to the future resurrection of the dead. In a way, the Rambam often will interpret verses allegorically, but he claims he can't do that in regards to these passages of resurrection of the dead. Like, for instance, the vision of Ezekiel of the dry bones coming to life. The Rambam says that doesn't have to be a reference to resurrection of the dead, because that could be metaphorically understood as the Jewish people coming to life in the period of redemption, but not physical, literal resurrection of the dead. But he claims that in a passage in Daniel, which we're not going to discuss right now, that it's unambiguous and not susceptible to being interpreted allegorically. And so, you just put two and two together. We believe in resurrection of the dead. There's no reason that Daniel is not going to be among those who are resurrected. And we have a passage in the Talmud that says the Messiah could have been from the dead. Put two and two together. And as Bruce just pointed out, the earliest Christians were Jews. They're rooted in Jewish tradition. And now, obviously, Christianity is not Judaism, and there are distortions, very severe distortions of Christianity. But it doesn't mean that every aspect of Christian thinking is per se invalid. And just to take it one step further, the fact that there may be a Jewish notion that interpreted, in this case, the way the Abarbanel is quoting it, that somehow is dangerous because it's evocative of a Christian idea, tough. Right? Tough. Right? Live with it. Right? We don't have to create artificial ways of undermining the Christian claim, right? According to Barbanel, the notion of a second coming, that's not the basis for undermining Christianity. There's much more profound basis, like we mentioned before, the fact that Jesus, through Christianity, does not represent the messianic agenda at all. It's the inverse of the messianic agenda. And furthermore, and I don't want to pursue this too much more, the notion that the Messiah is the Son of Jesus, the Son of God, is a deity, that's, to my mind, the real foundational problem of Christianity. Once you assume that God embodied himself in human form, that is idolatry, pure and simple. And so a religion and a personality that stood for idolatry cannot possibly be messianic. Okay, so Yaakov, I hope that helped you, but even if it doesn't right now, think about it. And you can report to me next week if it's still bothering you. Okay, any other questions or comments on anything we said so far?
Yeah, you say every time the Chaim makes him.
Yes, you're just pointing out the foundational centrality of the notion of resurrection of the dead. You're 100% right. And again, why not? Daniel is going to be resurrected, right? So why not? Maybe so we could interpret that Talmud. He was the Messiah and is the Messiah. And when the resurrection takes place at some stage in the messianic process, he will become the Melech HaMashiach, the King Messiah. Okay, fine.
Bar Kokhba was killed, not died. And that's the Rambam's different. The Rambam mentions killed, not died. Just like the Rebbe passed away from natural causes, he wasn't killed. So he could be a Mashiach.
Okay, so what you just said is an important point. I mentioned before that I don't see any way of interpreting the Rambam to support the messianic claim because of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. What you're pointing out is if you take the Rambam literally, that he says he's killed, then he can't be the Messiah. So to my mind, what the Rambam means is because he's using Bar Kokhba explicitly, the Rambam refers to Bar Kokhba explicitly in the messianic theory. Since it happens to be that Bar Kokhba, who was declared to be the Messiah, but it was Bechezkat Mashiach, and it happens to be that the way he ended his career was by being killed. That's why Rambam said he was killed. But that's not necessary to call it being killed, right? To disclaim or to undermine the messianic claim. It's that he didn't accomplish the messianic agenda. That's very clear to me from the Rambam. But I have heard people say that no, the Rambam just meant if he's killed, but if he dies of natural causes, he still could be distinguished.
Well, the Rambam is very careful about how he uses his words, generally.
Yeah, and he is careful because he's referring to, because the Rambam actually says if he doesn't complete the messianic agenda or he's killed. Right. So I think it's even clear from the Rambam's language. Mm-hmm. And the fact he was killed based upon Rambam as we slipped before. Okay, any other comments or questions before we go on? Okay, fine. I want to show you something pretty interesting. This is from a contemporary rabbi who's quoting the Abarbanel. I couldn't find this comment in the Abarbanel, but so Rav Uri Sharkey, some of you may have heard of him. So he quotes the Abarbanel. This is source number 6 on page 4. Rashei Tevot Menachem Shilo Yinon Hanina. Remember we saw a passage in Sanhedrin that we're taking a look at now, that each school of rabbis said the name of their teacher is the Mashiach, right? So one school said Menachem, one school said Shiloh, one school said Yinon, one says Hanina. So he just pointed out, if you take the first letter of each of those names, it spells Mashiach, right? Mem, Shin, Yud, Chet, right? Menachem, Shiloh, Yinon, Hanina. So what's the significance of that? So he goes on to say, that's the Barbanel's point. Klomar, kol echad ra'a b'rabo mashu min hatafkid hamashichi. That each of these students saw in their spiritual master that an aspect of the messianic function. And that happens to fit nicely in with Rabbi Menashe Klein's approach, right? That every generation has a potential Mashiach. Or every generation, according to the other reading in Rashi, has personalities that are sort of the prototype of Mashiach. And all the rabbis meant when they pointed to their own rabbi as being Mashiach was not that he's Mashiach, but he has the personality that he could be the Mashiach, or that the ultimate Mashiach will have the kind of character that our saintly rabbi has.
Where are you on the source sheet?
Yeah, that was source number 6 on page 4. Okay. Now I want to go on and point to another Talmudic source, happens to be a Midrash in Midrash Rabbah, which is used by the messianic faction within Chabad to support their claim about Lubavitcher Rebbe. So let's take a look at this passage, Midrash Rabbah. So we're on page 4, source number 7. Rabbi Brachi b'shem Rabbi Levi Amar, Kegoel harishon kach goel ha'acharon. Like the original Redeemer, that's Moshe Rabbeinu, so too will be the Goel Acharon, the ultimate Redeemer. There's going to be something similar. The ultimate Moshe, right, will be like the original Moshe. How so? He says the following: Hagol Rishon, Ze Moshe, the prototype, the original Redeemer, Moshe, Nigle Lahem v'chazar. He was revealed to his people and then disappeared. Now, the nichse, the chazar b'nichse mehem, right? So he was revealed, nigle lehem, the chazar b'nichse lehem. He was revealed and then he was hidden. That's what this midrash says. Now, that's a very cryptic midrash. So
why would you say this is Abraham when he rescued Lot?
No, because the midrash explicitly says it's Moshe. Hagol Rishon Ze Moshe, right? So now, what does this mean? Very hard to know. But those who use this source to support the idea of the Lubavitcher Rebbe being the Mashiach say that the Messiah is going to be identified as Messiah. He'll be revealed, the Redeemer, but then disappear. That's what it says here. He'll disappear, but then he will emerge again. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe disappeared, right? He died, but he will come back. So that's the claim of the messianists among Chabad, that you see this source supports the idea that there could be two different stages, that the Mashiach is revealed, disappears, and then revealed again. Yes?
Why did Moshe Rabbeinu disappear?
Can I call you Rabbi Menashe Klein?
Far from it.
So let's look at Rabbi Menashe Klein. Don't underestimate yourself. He says the following.
Is it
So
odd that
he's
the Muslims
responding-
have the exact same Masorah?
The same doctrine?
Yeah, of it disappearing. The Mahdi disappears. I think they're the 12ers.
I know nothing about it.
He disappears and he'll be revealed in the future. The same guy will come back, and that'll be it.
Yeah, I'm having a hard enough time understanding Judaism. Stick to one religion. So look at Rabbi Menashe Klein says, source number 8. Pli'a atzumahi. He says this is a complete mighty wonder how anybody could use this source to somehow support the messianic contention surrounding the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Moshe shenit kasemehem lomei. Because when the Midrash says the ultimate Redeemer would be like Moshe, who disappeared and then appeared, Moshe didn't die. That's not what it means he disappeared, right? It says concealed, right? He was concealed. It doesn't mean die. Elisha barach mitzrayim. He fled from Egypt. Because Paro wanted to kill him. So he was like a public personality who engaged in acts on behalf of his people, like killing the Egyptian, but then he had to disappear, right? He ran away to Midian. The Galal Midian, right? He was exiled to Midian. O Lakush, or Lashar Mekamot, there's all kinds of midrashim that says he traveled to different places. Below Shemet doesn't mean he died, the Chazar, the Chai, and then came back and lived, Bivchinat Tchiat HaMeitim, through the mechanism of resurrection of the dead. That's not Moshe's history. So you can't use Moshe as a paradigm of disappearing and then reappearing and saying it's dying and then being resurrected. No, with Moshe, it was all within natural sphere. He went on a trip to other countries. for his own personal reasons. In different stages in his negotiations with Paro, and he had to exit stage right. It's not that he died. Bnei Yisrael. He went to a place where people didn't know where he was. Oh, Paro, Shteihem, or that Paro wouldn't know where he was, or Yisrael and Paro wouldn't know where he was. But the point is that he went into hiding. It's not that he died and resurrected. What relevance is there of this midrash to somebody who died and was buried in the way of the world? Lubavitch Rebbe died and he's buried, right? This midrash has no connection to that. That has nothing to do with nichseh, to be covered, right? To be hidden. That's Moshe going to a different country. That's not dying. It's that he died. The Lubavitch Rebbe is talking about now. Lubavitch Rebbe died. Now I want you to pay attention to the language here. V'chayo yichyeh, and he will surely live. Lubavitch Rebbe. This is Rabbi Menashe Klein talking about Lubavitch Rebbe. He will surely live im sha'ar tzadikim, with the other tzadikim. Sheyikayem hakadosh baruch hu emunato lishenei afar. When God actualizes His promise to those who sleep in the dust. B'marav yameinu amen. It happened in our own time. Amen. So Rabbi Menashe Klein is referring to the Lubavitch Rebbe as a tzaddik who is going to be resurrected at the time of resurrection. That's absolutely true. But the notion that he somehow is going to have a second coming, according to Rabbi Menashe Klein, is not supported by this midrash of being concealed and then reappearing, right, concerning Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course, as we already mentioned, he doesn't feel it's supported either by the Talmud and Sanhedrin about the Mashiach being among the dead, because according to Rabbi Menashe Klein, the Gemara just means that every generation has a potential Mashiach, and Daniel was that potential Mashiach, but we didn't deserve it. Okay? Obviously, he doesn't accept the Barbanel's approach. Okay, any questions or comments on this before we go on?
I'm just curious the role that midrash is supposed to play in our either halakhic analysis or anything else for that matter.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. You know, how compelling is midrash in general? So that's a huge topic which deserves its own shiur. But in this particular case, we're kind of stuck because we don't have much else to go on. By the way, ironically, Chabad, for that very reason, uses the Rambam's messianic theory as detailed in the Mishneh Torah as its main source. I say ironically because I think the Rambam is the greatest refutation of the claim that the Lubavitch Rebbe could be the Mashiach. But in any case, they rely upon the Rambam. Why? Because the Rambam's work, Mishneh Torah, is a legal work, right? So since it is a law code, therefore we can rely upon it to come to some type of, potentially conclusive psak, as it were, on this issue. Whereas midrashim, it's very hard to know what they're saying, very hard to know how to interpret them. And there's a general question to what extent are midrashim binding. And we have plenty of, this is a fascinating topic, as we'll discuss another time. Very fascinating discussions among the Rishonim, how compelling are midrashim. Okay. I want to take any other comments or questions. Okay. I want to go on now and just take a look at a concluding passage from Rabbi Menashe Klein. So this is page 5, and it's the last source in that particular packet. V'lachen lefi aniyat da'ati. Therefore, according to my humble opinion, kol mi sheyesh biyado techefu miyad lahashtik ulahafsika hachrazot. Anybody who has it within their power to silence the declarations shemachrisin la'achar o kodem hatfilot that are declared either after or before davening, where people in certain Chabad shul say in unison out loud, Yechi Adonenu Morenu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam Va'ed. May our master, our teacher, our rabbi, the King Mashiach live forever. Has anybody ever been in a shul that said that? Okay, so
Yes.
so the Rabbi Menashe Klein says that if you have the guts and a bulletproof vest on, you have the power to stand up and to silence that, then you should. And now, but listen how he. This is
Hard
really
to do that at 770, though.
Oh, you did it?
I didn't, but I was at 770 when it was set, and I was not in position to. I was outnumbered tremendously.
That was a wise choice on your part. I don't think that you're required to martyr yourself over this particular issue. So, but look how he explains himself, and I think it's actually very touching. Shehu bizayon lichvod kodsho admor milubavitch. It's a disgrace or a profound disrespect. Shaming. I'm not sure exactly a good translation of the word bizayon. It's a terrible shaming and expression of disrespect to the. Now, look at the language he uses. These are all terms of great respect. His lechvod kodsho, to the holy honor of Adonenu Morenu V'Rabbeinu. Admor, that's what that stands for. Adonenu Morenu V'Rabbeinu Milubavitch. Lubavitch Rebbe. Rabbi Menashe Klein himself uses these terms of incredible reverence and veneration, but then he adds Zatzal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, right? May the memory of the righteous be for a blessing. That's actually becomes a big issue in Chabad publications. You write Zatzal after Rebbe's name, you'll see, generally speaking, that's not done. It leaves a certain ambiguity. So, along with expressing this incredible veneration for the Lubavitch Rebbe, he adds Zatzal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He's dead. V'gam lechalushe moach. And also, besides the fact that it's a tremendous disrespect to Lubavitch Rebbe, and I'll explain why in a second, he says it's also very dangerous, and this is Yaakov, where I think you'll like this. To those people who are weak of mind, that doesn't mean you, Yaakov. Hu Rahman al-Itzlan. Why? Because it is, if you believe that the Lubavitch Rebbe can come back a second coming, he claims, Rabbi Menashe Klein says, God forbid, what is it? Dugma shalom nosrim lahavdil. This sounds like Christianity. This is exactly your claim, Yaakov. If you support the claim of the second coming, you are in fact supporting a fundamental notion of Christianity, that Jesus is going to come back a second coming. So, Yaakov, you're not alone in your concern. Rabbi Menashe Klein had similar concerns. I should point out that he says, "V'gam lechalushe moach," to those people of weak mind. Again, it's not you, Yaakov. I think what Rabbi Menashe Klein means is that we can make a distinction. Even if we were to hold there's such a thing as the second coming, there's a big distinction between the Christian claim and the Jewish claim. The Jewish claim is that this guy was a big tzaddik and he's going to come back and finish the job. According to our perspective, Rasha, Jesus was a big Rasha. And so what does it mean to come back and finish the job? He didn't start it. On the contrary, he put into motion ideas and processes which are antithetical to messianism and to redemption. Okay, but not everybody's going to make that kind of fine distinction. So it's dangerous in that respect. And then he ends with this really interesting use of the verse in Tehillim in Psalms. He says, you can perhaps invoke this verse in Psalms, do not touch my anointed ones and do not harm my prophets. In other words, I think the way he's using that verse in Tehillim is that that the notion of declaring the Lubavitch Rebbe as the Messiah who's going to come back is in fact a fundamental distortion of the whole notion of Mashiach and undermines our faith in the authentic notion of Mashiach. And perhaps that could be alluded to by Al Tagib Shuchai. Don't touch my messiahs, right? Don't disturb and disrupt and distort the concept of Mashiach. And he sees that alluded to perhaps in Tehillim. Now, I just want to back up for a second. And when he says it's a bizayon, it's a disgrace to the memory of Lubavitch Rebbe, what does he mean by that? So I'm going to speculate right now. Two possible speculations, they both could be true. One of them is Rabbi Menashe Klein obviously feels very strongly about this particular issue. He obviously rejects the Abarbanel's reading of the Talmud. And therefore, the Lubavitch Rebbe, who was a of gigantic proportions, to somehow attribute to the Lubavitch Rebbe an understanding of Mashiach, which is, in Rabbi Menashe Klein's view, a total distortion and perversion of the authentic concept of Mashiach, that's a disgrace to the Lubavitch Rebbe. Because especially the messianic faction of Chabad claims the Lubavitch Rebbe during his own lifetime more or less explicitly declared himself to be Mashiach. Now, if you take a look at the writings where it's claimed the Lubavitch Rebbe is saying, I'm Mashiach, it's far from clear that that's what Lubavitch Rebbe meant. But that is the understanding of that faction within Chabad. So if you're going to claim the Lubavitch Rebbe himself declare himself to be a Mashiach, but then he died and is going to be resurrected, etc., and there could be a second coming, that's attributing to the Lubavitch Rebbe personally ideas which, from Rabbi Menashe Klein's point of view, are a profound distortion. So that's number one. Number two, and the second point I really relate to, particularly outside of Israel, there's no question in my mind, personally, that the discussion about whether or not the Lubavitch Rebbe is Messiah adds nothing to the agenda of the Lubavitch Rebbe. Because the agenda of the Lubavitch Rebbe was to bring Jews back to Torah. That was the agenda. And he made contributions to that in ways which are almost supernatural. That one person could rally the troops to create a movement that created a spiritual revolution in the Jewish world. The Baal Tshuva movement is largely, if not exclusively, I don't want to take credit from Eshet Torah or Rabbi Shlomo Karlach or anybody else that was in early stages involved in Kiruv Rechokim and bringing Jews back to Judaism. There's no doubt in my mind Lubavitch is at the forefront and probably started the whole thing. And you look at today what Chabad does. It's absolutely beyond belief, both in the areas of bringing Jews back to Judaism and just caring about the welfare of another Jew. It's a fact, and you see this a lot in the Israeli press. All of our kids who, after the army, go traipsing around the world. I don't know why my kids have to go to Thailand after going to be in the army, but they, for some reason, they do. And when they want to then experience Shabbat or anything else Jewish, and they're in Nepal or Thailand or Peru, Chabad. And if chas v'shalom, something happens, to one of our children, to an Israeli, who deals with it? Chabad. Right? Who deals with drug addiction in the Jewish community? Chabad. Who feeds the hungry in the Jewish community? A lot of people. I'm not sure on the level of Chabad. Who deals with Jewish prisoners? Chabad. To argue Lubavitch Rebbe is Mashiach, I don't see any way that that somehow serves the mission of Chabad. And on the contrary, it undermines it. Why? Because since for most people, that claim sounds ludicrous.
Well, that's only to Jews.
Well, let me just finish. Since for most people, that claim Lubavitch Rebbe is Messiah, I think unless you're a hardcore Lubavitcher and you're driving to Tel Aviv and you see a billboard that says, welcome Melech HaMashiach, and a picture of Lubavitch Rebbe, that does not generate warm and fuzzy feelings towards the work of Chabad. I think for most people, and I even think for most Orthodox Jews, they look at that and say, that is nutty. That's nutty. And what that does is undermine our support. And in some ways, I take that very literally. In the United States, there was a serious threat to the financial support of Chabad. Chabad gets a lot of financial support from non-Orthodox Jews. I know shouldn't be a surprise to you. For a non-Orthodox Jew, when you start talking about the Messiah, they start to wonder, is this where I should be putting my money? So I think that's another very serious concern about whether or not this messianic claim, whether or not that is in the interests of Chabad as a movement. And it's a very serious argument made that it undermines its ability to function maximally, and in that sense is a bizayon to the legacy of the most recent Lubavitch Rebbe. Okay, now I'll open it up for a couple of questions, and then I just want to tell you what we're going to do next week. Yes.
I wonder if your thoughts there are really for Orthodox Jews who are knowledgeable to some extent, but for the vast majority of Jews who know very, very little, they may find the Mashiach idea intriguing, thinking it's a Christian idea. When they hear the Jews are talking about it, they may want to now check that out. And it could actually bring Jews into that fold just because they've heard of the term and had no idea that it could be a Jewish idea.
That's an interesting idea. You're saying you're adding another problematic aspect, that once you sort of create messianic curiosity and agitation, it could drift into a very different direction than we'd like it to. Not an interesting point. Could be.
Well, in a positive way.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions on what we said today? Okay. Yes.
I know that people who wrote letters to the Rebbe when he was still alive, especially in 1991, I don't remember who exactly, but the Rebbe, it introduces him, as the Mashiach. Thank you, Rebbe Mashiach, et cetera, et cetera. And the Rebbe threw the letter down and say, enough. This letter's not addressed to me. It's addressed to the Mashiach. Make sure he sent it back to the person, telling him to deliver when the Mashiach comes to give him the letter.
Yeah. So I've never heard that before. If you could forward that to me,
yes,
I would be interested in seeing that. I've never heard that story before. That's an interesting story if it's true. Let me just conclude by giving you a little taste of what we're going to discuss next week. So we're not done. What I want to discuss next week is, what is the Messianic era going to look like? What's it going to look like? And you'll see some really fascinating disputes that begin already in the Talmudic period and go up to the medieval period and up till today. And so that'll be our next stop in our discussion of Messianism. So Messianism part 6 for next week.
Also, Rabbi, do you have a comment on that article that I sent you on rabbinic anti-messianism?
Yeah, so I actually only read the first part of it. I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing, but it looked very fascinating. So I can't comment on it, but thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hi.